It started the way a lot of bad moments do, quietly and with a smile. Officially, it was a training exercise, one of those drills meant to build toughness, trust, and cohesion under pressure. Unofficially, it was something else. A proving ground where ego mattered more than skill and where people decided who belonged long before anyone gave them a fair shot. The drill was framed as intense but controlled, rough but professional. That's how it was sold. That's how it looked on paper. But paper doesn't capture tone. It doesn't capture glances exchanged when someone makes a mistake. It doesn't capture the way laughter hangs in the air just a second too long. From the moment she stepped onto the field, the mood shifted. Not openly hostile. Not yet. Just dismissive. Like she was already behind before the whistle even blew. Every move she made was watched, not to learn from, but to judge. Every misstep was magnified. Every success quietly ignored. Training drills are supposed to simulate chaos, but this chaos was curated. Hands lingered longer than necessary. Instructions were barked sharper at her than at anyone else. When she asked for clarification, it was treated like weakness. When she pushed through anyway, it was treated like luck. The line between pressure and provocation blurred fast, and the people running the drill pretended not to notice. Or maybe they noticed and didn't care. Humiliation doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it creeps in wearing the uniform of authority. It hides behind phrases like toughen up. This is how it's always been. If you can't handle this, you don't belong here. That was the language being spoken, even when no one said it out loud. The drill escalated, and so did the behavior. Shoves that were framed as accidental. Commands delivered inches from her face. Smirks exchanged when she stumbled and recovered. The helmet incident wasn't random. It wasn't heat-of-the-moment chaos. It was a choice. Someone decided that embarrassing her would be funny, that it would be instructive, that it would put her back in her place. In the middle of the drill, hands reached up and yanked the helmet clean off her head. Not a slip, not a malfunction. A deliberate act meant to expose her, literally and figuratively. The drill froze for half a second as laughter broke out. That laugh mattered. It wasn't loud, but it was collective. It told her everything she needed to know about how the room saw her. The helmet wasn't just protective gear. It was authority, safety, belonging. Taking it off her like that stripped more than equipment. It told her she was a prop, a punchline, a reminder to anyone watching that this was still their space, their rules, their game. No one called it out. No one stopped the drill immediately. The humiliation was allowed to breathe. In training environments like this, silence is endorsement. The longer it goes unchecked, the more it becomes normalized. People tell themselves it's part of the process, that everyone goes through something like this, that it builds character. What it really builds is permission. She stood there exposed, heart racing, aware of every eye on her. The moment stretched. She could react and be labeled emotional. She could freeze and be labeled weak. Either way, the story would be written without her consent. That's the trap of humiliation disguised as training. It corners you into losing no matter what move you make. This wasn't about toughness. It wasn't about preparing for real-world conditions. In the real world, your teammates don't sabotage you mid-mission for entertainment. This was about power, about reminding someone they were alone, about reinforcing a hierarchy that didn't need to be spoken because everyone already understood it. The drill continued, but the tone had shifted. What had started as physical pressure turned psychological, and that's the part people rarely admit. Physical drills end. Bruises fade. But moments like this linger because they're designed to. They plant doubt. They make you second-guess your presence, your abilities, your right to stand where you're standing. They teach you that mistakes won't just be corrected, they'll be broadcast. That vulnerability will be exploited, not protected. That respect is conditional and can be revoked at any time by the people who think they own the space. From the outside, it still looked like training. From the inside, it had become something else entirely. There's always a point where pressure stops being pressure and turns into something else. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a whistle or a shouted command. It arrives quietly, often disguised as just another hard moment in a hard environment. For her, that moment came when the drill shifted from testing limits to targeting her personally. You can feel it before you can explain it. The air tightens. The rules bend in ways they never seem to bend for anyone else. Up until then, everything had plausible deniability. A shove could be written off as accidental contact. A barked order could be blamed on urgency. Even the smirks could be dismissed as nerves or adrenaline. But intent has weight, and eventually it shows. The drill leaders stopped correcting others, but stayed locked on her. Instructions came faster, louder, closer. She was being rushed on purpose. Not to make her better, but to make her fail. Mistakes became invitations. Each stumble was met with exaggerated reactions. Someone laughed too quickly. Someone else echoed it. The sound spread just enough to let her know it wasn't isolated. She adjusted her stance, tightened her grip, refocused. That only seemed to irritate them more. There's a particular kind of resentment that shows up when someone refuses to break on schedule. It turns roughness into cruelty. The drill was supposed to simulate confusion, but what unfolded was precision. She was steered into positions where visibility was worse, footing less stable. Commands overlapped intentionally. When she hesitated for half a second, someone bumped her shoulder hard enough to knock her off balance. Again, no one said anything. The absence of correction was loud. It told the group that this was allowed, maybe even encouraged. She caught the eyes of one of the instructors, expecting some signal, some check on the escalation. What she got instead was indifference. A look past her, not at her. That was when she understood the protection she thought existed didn't apply to her. The framework of fairness she'd trusted was conditional. It worked until it didn't. And now it didn't. The line was crossed when one of them decided to turn her into an example. Not an example of excellence, but of what happens when you don't know your place. It happened fast, but not so fast it could be mistaken for an accident. Fingers hooked under the edge of her helmet. A sharp pull. The strap snapped free, and suddenly the weight was gone. So was the barrier between her and everyone watching. For a split second, her body reacted before her mind did. Instinct flared. She reached up, heart slamming, exposed to elements she wasn't supposed to be exposed to mid-drill. Helmets weren't optional. They were mandatory for a reason. That reason didn't matter in that moment. What mattered was the reaction around her. The laughter wasn't explosive. It was worse than that. It was casual, comfortable. That was the crossing. Not just the removal of the helmet, but the response it drew. Because safety had been compromised on purpose. Because authority had been abused openly. Because the drill had been hijacked to make a point that had nothing to do with training. Everyone present understood it, even if no one said it. You could see it in the way some people looked away. In the way others leaned in, entertained. The rules had changed without being rewritten. What was once a controlled environment became unpredictable in a way no manual prepares you for. The kind of unpredictability that comes from people, not scenarios. She was expected to absorb it, to keep moving, to pretend nothing had happened. That expectation was part of the punishment. If she stopped, she was weak. If she protested, she was difficult. If she continued, she validated what they'd done. Her helmet lay on the ground, scuffed and still. No one moved to return it. No one called a halt. The drill continued around her like this was normal. Like this was acceptable. Like this was the cost of admission. She could feel her pulse in her ears, the imbalance of missing gear, the awareness that something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't about endurance anymore. It was about whether she would accept the message being sent. That message was simple. You are fair game. Your safety is negotiable. Your dignity is optional. And if this could happen in front of everyone, in the open, during a sanctioned exercise, then there were no real limits left to test. After the laughter faded, something heavier took its place. Not shouting, not chaos, silence. The kind that drops suddenly and makes every sound sharper. Boots on gravel, breathing through clenched teeth. The low hum of the environment that had been there all along but went unnoticed until now. The drill didn't officially stop, but it stalled, like everyone sensed something had shifted and didn't know what to do with it. She stood there without her helmet, hands still where they'd been trained to be, posture locked in place. No one told her to move. No one told her to stay still. The absence of instruction was deliberate. It left her suspended, waiting for a cue that never came. Around her, people avoided eye contact. A few stared openly, curious to see what would happen next. Silence can be a kind of crowd participation. You don't have to cheer to be involved. The instructors didn't speak. That mattered more than anything else. They were the ones who could have reset the moment, called a halt, reasserted control. Instead, they let the quiet stretch. It was a test layered on top of a test, though this one had nothing to do with skill. It was about endurance of a different kind. How long someone could stand inside humiliation without breaking form. Time slowed in that way it does when adrenaline has nowhere to go. Seconds felt longer than they were. She became hyper-aware of small details. The grit under her boots. The weight imbalance without the helmet. The way her shoulders tightened as she kept herself steady. Silence amplifies everything internal. Doubt creeps in. Anger rises and has to be swallowed. Training tells you to control your reactions. Situations like this weaponize that discipline against you. Someone snorted under their breath. Another shifted position. A laugh tried to surface and got cut off, not out of respect, but out of uncertainty. People sense when a moment is teetering. They feel the risk of misreading it. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was volatile. Everyone was waiting for someone else to act first, to define what this moment meant. She could feel eyes drifting toward one figure on the edge of the formation. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't moved when the helmet was pulled off. That stillness stood out now. While others fidgeted, he remained fixed, gaze locked forward. Not on her. Not on the helmet. On the people who had done it. Silence reads differently depending on who holds it. In his case, it wasn't passive. There's a difference between freezing and choosing not to move. Anyone who's been around controlled violence understands that difference instinctively. The air around him felt tighter, denser. The kind of quiet that comes before something decisive. People picked up on it without being able to explain why. Conversations didn't start back up. The drill didn't resume. No one wanted to be the one who misjudged what came next. Authority usually announces itself loudly. Orders, whistles, rank. But sometimes it reasserts itself by withholding all of that. By letting the weight of expectation build until it becomes unbearable. That's what was happening. The silence became a line in the sand. Cross it, and you own whatever followed. The ones who'd started the humiliation sensed it too. Their confidence ebbed, replaced by the uneasy awareness that the room was no longer theirs. She stayed still, not because she was calm, but because she was trained to be. That distinction matters. Calm implies peace. This was restraint. The kind that takes effort. The kind that can snap if pushed further. Silence asks a question without words. Who's in control now? Who's going to decide how this ends? No one rushed to fill the quiet. Even the most vocal ones held back. In environments like this, people learn to read the invisible signals. The pause before a storm. The moment right before a command that changes everything. You could almost feel the collective breath being held. The silence wasn't empty. It was crowded with anticipation. Somewhere in that pause, the balance of power shifted. Not visibly, not officially, but everyone felt it. The humiliation had done what it was meant to do, up to a point, and then it had gone too far. Silence marked that threshold. It was the last chance for someone to step in gently, for the moment to be corrected without escalation. No one took it. He moved without announcing it. No shout, no warning, just a shift in posture that drew attention the way a sudden drop in temperature does. 1 second he was part of the background, another figure in formation, and the next he was walking forward with purpose that didn't ask permission. Boots hit the ground in steady rhythm, unhurried, controlled. That calm was what made people nervous. It wasn't impulsive. It was decided. Everyone noticed, even if they pretended not to. Conversations that hadn't fully restarted died instantly. Bodies straightened. Someone took a step back without realizing they were doing it. The men who'd been smirking a moment earlier felt it first. Confidence drains fast when it's built on borrowed authority. They'd been loud when they thought no one serious was watching. Now someone was. He stopped close enough to be undeniable. Not in her space, but near enough that the situation reframed itself around him. His presence changed the geometry of the drill. What had been a loose circle of spectators tightened into something more formal, more rigid. People defaulted to training without being told. Hands went where they were supposed to go. Eyes faced forward. He didn't look at her helmet on the ground right away. He looked at the men standing closest to it. One by one. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of look that isn't searching for an explanation because it already understands exactly what happened. That look carried weight because of who he was and where he'd been. It wasn't rank alone. It was reputation. The kind you don't earn through stories, but through patterns that repeat over time. When he spoke, his voice was low. Not quiet, but measured. It cut through the space more cleanly than shouting ever could. He asked a simple question. Not why. Not who thought it was funny. Just who authorized it. No one answered. Silence again, but this time it wasn't uncertain. It was defensive. People were calculating, running through mental checklists, trying to decide whether honesty or silence was safer. He let that silence sit for a beat longer than was comfortable. Then he bent down and picked up the helmet himself. Checked the strap. Checked the shell. Routine movements, but loaded with meaning. He handed it back to her without ceremony. No speech. No reassurance. The gesture alone reset something fundamental. It returned what had been taken, publicly and without negotiation. Then he turned back to the others. His stance shifted. Subtle, but unmistakable to anyone trained to recognize it. Weight balanced. Shoulders squared. Hands relaxed but ready. This wasn't posturing. This was readiness. The drill, as they'd known it, was over. Whatever happened next would be real in a way they hadn't planned for. He didn't insult them. Didn't raise his voice. He stated facts. That safety violations weren't jokes. That training wasn't an excuse for ego. That anyone who thought otherwise had misunderstood where they were and who they were standing next to. Each sentence landed cleanly, without embellishment. The absence of anger made it worse. Anger can be dismissed as emotional. This couldn't. One of the men tried to explain. A half step forward, a shrug, a laugh that didn't quite land. He didn't get far. The SEAL cut him off mid-sentence with a look that froze him in place. No physical contact yet. Just dominance established through certainty. The kind that doesn't need to escalate to be effective, but will if forced. The rest of them stayed silent. They'd lost the room. They knew it. The drill instructors who'd looked away earlier suddenly found their voices, but now they were cautious. Deferential. They were no longer directing events. They were reacting to them. Authority had been reclaimed without paperwork, without argument. He repositioned them. Moved people where he wanted them with short commands. Clear. Efficient. No room for interpretation. The men obeyed immediately, not because of rank insignia, but because instinct told them this was not a moment to test boundaries. The atmosphere changed from casual cruelty to disciplined tension. She stood where she was told, helmet back on, breathing steadying. She wasn't the focus anymore, and that mattered. The spotlight shifted to accountability, to consequences, to the reality that some lines, once crossed, demand a response. The SEAL took one last look at the group, eyes cold, assessing. The message didn't need to be repeated. It was already understood by everyone present. This wasn't over. It had simply moved into a phase they couldn't laugh their way through. Authority didn't shift because someone raised their voice or pulled rank. It shifted because everyone in that space realized, almost at the same time, that the rules they thought protected them no longer applied. The casual hierarchy that had allowed disrespect to pass as toughness collapsed under the weight of something more solid. Authority stopped being theoretical and became immediate. Moments earlier, control had belonged to whoever felt bold enough to take it. Jokes landed without consequence. Actions went unchecked. The drill had been theirs to bend. That illusion dissolved fast. You could see it in the way people stood differently. Shoulders that had been loose squared up. Hands that had been relaxed snapped back into discipline. No one needed to be told. Their bodies recognized the change before their minds caught up. The SEAL didn't claim authority. He demonstrated it. He didn't need permission because he embodied standards that predated the drill, the instructors, and the moment itself. Authority like that doesn't argue. It doesn't explain itself. It creates a gravity that pulls everything into alignment. The men who'd felt untouchable seconds earlier now measured every movement, every breath. What made it unmistakable was how quickly the room recalibrated. The instructors who'd allowed the humiliation suddenly deferred without being asked. Their tone softened. Their posture shifted. They weren't challenged verbally. They were bypassed. That's what stripped their authority away. No confrontation, just replacement. In environments built on respect, nothing exposes weakness faster than someone else stepping in and doing your job better without asking. Commands became cleaner. Fewer words. Less noise. The chaos that had been encouraged vanished. In its place was precision. People responded instantly, not because they were afraid of punishment, but because they recognized competence. The difference matters. Fear fractures. Respect organizes. Authority rooted in skill and certainty snaps things into place. The men who'd crossed the line felt it most sharply. They'd relied on group energy, on shared laughter, on the assumption that no one important would interfere. Now they stood alone inside themselves. Eyes forward, mouths shut. Their earlier confidence had nowhere to go. When authority is real, excuses evaporate. No one was singled out publicly, and that was deliberate. Authority doesn't need spectacle. It needs compliance. The message wasn't delivered through humiliation, but through structure. Positions reassigned. Roles clarified. Movement controlled. The space itself changed character. It no longer tolerated improvisation born of ego. It demanded discipline. She felt the shift too, though she wasn't the one being corrected. For the first time since the drill began, the environment made sense again. Expectations were clear. Boundaries were visible. The uncertainty that had made her a target drained away. Authority, when it's done right, protects everyone by removing ambiguity. People often mistake loudness for leadership. They confuse dominance with control. What happened here exposed that misunderstanding. The loudest voices had vanished. The most aggressive behavior had been neutralized without force. Authority was redefined not by who could intimidate, but by who could stabilize. Every second that passed under this new order reinforced it. No one tested it. No one joked. No one pushed. That kind of restraint doesn't come from fear alone. It comes from recognition. Recognition that the person now setting the tone understood consequences better than anyone else in the room. Not as threats, but as realities. The drill continued, but it was a different drill now. Movements were sharper, timing tighter, mistakes corrected without mockery. The men adjusted because they had to, because authority had been clarified in a way that left no room for interpretation. There was no debate about who was in charge. That question had been answered the moment control was taken without resistance. Authority had been redefined not through punishment, but through presence, through decisiveness, through the quiet understanding that some people don't need to prove themselves because their standards speak first. And once those standards are enforced, even briefly, they linger. No one forgot how fast it happened, how quickly the balance tipped, how a space that had tolerated disrespect transformed into one governed by discipline. It only took seconds, but it exposed everything that had been hollow underneath. The men standing there understood something new now, whether they liked it or not. Authority isn't granted by permission or numbers. It's claimed by those willing to enforce the line when others pretend it doesn't exist. The lesson didn't come as a lecture or a debrief. No one gathered them afterward to spell it out. That wasn't necessary. The kind of lesson delivered that day doesn't need repetition because it burns itself into memory. Everyone who witnessed it walked away carrying the same understanding, even if they would never admit it out loud. They learned that lines exist even in environments built on toughness. Especially there. Training is meant to harden people against external threats, not turn them into threats against each other. When that balance is broken, everything else becomes unreliable. Trust erodes. Focus splinters. The drill that followed proved it. Performance tightened not because people were afraid, but because they were clear again on what mattered. They learned that silence can be more dangerous than shouting. The moments before intervention were replayed in their minds later. The way no one spoke up. The way laughter filled the gap where leadership should have been. It forced an uncomfortable realization. Harm doesn't always come from the person who crosses the line first. It comes from everyone who decides not to stop it. They learned that real authority doesn't need to humiliate to assert itself. The contrast was sharp. Humiliation had been loud, messy, fueled by ego. Authority had been quiet, efficient, and final. One destabilized the group. The other stabilized it instantly. That difference stuck. It reframed how power was understood in that space. They learned that reputation is earned long before it's needed. The response that changed everything worked because of who delivered it, not because of rank on paper, but because of a history people believed in. When standards are enforced by someone who lives them, compliance is immediate. There's no argument, no testing, just alignment. They learned that safety is non-negotiable, not situational, not dependent on who's watching. The helmet wasn't just gear. It represented a boundary. Once it was violated, the entire exercise lost legitimacy. That moment forced everyone to confront how quickly training can become reckless when accountability disappears. They learned that cruelty disguised as tradition is still cruelty. The excuse of this is how it's always been lost its power that day. Tradition doesn't justify behavior. It either strengthens a group or exposes its weaknesses. What had been defended as toughness was revealed as laziness, an unwillingness to lead properly. They learned that respect is enforced through consistency, not intimidation. The atmosphere after the intervention proved it. No one felt the need to show off. No one sought attention. The group functioned better because expectations were clear and enforced evenly. That kind of respect doesn't fade when the authority figure leaves the room. It holds because it makes sense. They learned that the cost of crossing certain lines is immediate and personal, not bureaucratic, not delayed. Consequences didn't come in the form of paperwork or threats. They came as a loss of standing, of credibility, of control. That loss was visible, and it mattered more than any formal reprimand could have. They learned something about themselves, too. About how easily they'd laughed, how quickly they'd gone along, how little it had taken to forget why the training existed in the first place. That self-awareness was uncomfortable. It lingered longer than any bruise. They learned that some moments define culture more than years of routine. One incident reshaped how people behaved afterward. Jokes stopped landing the same way. Lines weren't tested as casually. The memory sat in the background, unspoken but active, shaping decisions. They learned that courage doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like stepping in when it's inconvenient, when it disrupts the flow, when it exposes failures that others would rather ignore. That kind of courage resets standards whether people welcome it or not. They learned that once a lesson like that is delivered, it doesn't need to be repeated. No one tried anything similar again. Not because they were reminded, because they remembered.